Hey guys, Infidel 1258 here. Tonight I'm going to get into a video outlining the most overrated, overpriced cards within the modern league. These are monsters you're familiar with, monsters that we will be able to play within the modern league as we divide the Splinterlands ranked battles into modern and wild. So we're looking at Untamed, we're looking at Dice, we're looking at Chaos Legion, and some modern reward cards. Okay, so I'm going to give you my most overrated card from each splinter. Fire, water, all of them, including neutral. Okay, so we'll get into that now. Before we do, my name is Dwayne Cunningham and I go by Infidel1258, and on the channel we cover Splinterlands all day, every day, because it's changed my life, and I think it can change yours. And one of the ways that it's done that for me is by this process of understanding the utility and value of each monster card, because that's allowed me to anticipate the evolution of the meta. And so thinking things through in the way that we will throughout this video will hopefully equip you with the tools that allow you to, on your own time, go through the marketplace and decide what cards you think are must-have. But these are my absolute least interested. I don't want them. Some cases I have them, but they're the cards I think are either overrated or overpriced from the modern league. Let's get into it. So the first one I got queued up is, well, first of all, let's look. I'm looking at Reward, Untamed, Dice, and Chaos, and I'm just looking at regular. And then I went splinter by splinter, just looking at what I could see, and I've got notes. From the fire side, I've decided Anju. A Ganju was my number. Let's look at the wall together first. I mean, these guys are so cheap, it's like, it's not a big deal to buy them. And so they like I said in an earlier video, when a card is inexpensive, it doesn't attract as much heat. It doesn't deserve as much animosity. And so why are we going to get all fired up that maybe the Radiated Scorcher is not the best card when it only costs 3 cents? Who cares? But as you scroll down and you get into some of these cards that are worth, they cost quite a bit, they better be valuable. They better be useful. Tenyi Striker definitely is. Dwarf is. Launcher is, especially for these price points. And I scroll down and I just see a bunch of good cards so far. I mean, Pyromancer is questionable to me. I don't love it. It's too slow. I don't like archery in the first place, to be honest. It's probably a pass for me. But again, $3 is not the biggest deal. As we begin doing, like, $3 times 46 would be $150 ish to get a max copy. Maybe you have a Jotun, and then that begins to probably make sense. Yes, it already has blast, but it's one more archer. So I can see some usefulness there. I could see some reasons why you might want to. Scrolling down further, I mean, Pyromaniac is another that I don't care for. Phyrexia General, again. Archeries, I don't primarily go for them. And Sniper here and Sneak Attack here, I could pass on both of them. But at the end of the day, a Ganju is $60 per BCX, and you need 11 of them to make this card max. And this is one of those cards that I just don't feel really moves the needle. And so it's like we discussed before, if you're going to have to spend $600, $700 on a card, it really needs to bring a lot to the table, and I don't see that as the case here. Yes, it's 1 mana. Of course, 2 melee damage from a 1 mana monster in certain niche contexts can be really meaningful, like when melee can attack from any position, or in really low mana matches where you just need 1 more melee monster, or perhaps where equalizer matches are happening, right? Because 2 melee is not bad, especially for 1 mana when you get 6 or 8 or 10 hit points out of the deal. But this thing is just too weak. It's too vulnerable. Yes, it's a reach monster. That makes it a little better. But the 1 melee at every level, to me, is useless. Yes, you could bring Tarsa and you could add a little oomph to it, but I just feel like you're talking about if you have to add a certain summoner to make a monster viable, that's a problem. That's a red flag. That means that the monster lacks some of the power that you really want it to bring, and you're complementing. You're bringing in, yeah. Any monster can be good when you bring Kitty. Any low melee monster can be improved when you bring out like a Tarsa with extra hit points and extra melee. So what does this do? It fits into a certain hole. It uses up some of your mana points, but unless I mean, most of us have Creeping Ooze. Many of us have Furious Chicken. Increasingly, you're seeing people with the Scorch Fiend. So I just find it really hard to believe that you need a 4th card on your team that is like a 1 mana cost. I don't know who this is appealing to. Again, like I said in a previous video, with some of these high-priced legendary cards, the question seems to be, if you've got almost a perfect deck, maybe this is a card that you would want, because it might be that one little hole that you have on your fire deck. But for most people, this is a pass, and for me, it's overrated, and for me, it's overpriced, and I don't want it. I don't own it. I don't want it, and it's not because it's bad exactly. It's just because it doesn't move the needle for the cost that it takes to get it. That's how I feel about that one. Let's move on to water. So with the water team, I did the same thing. I started down at the bottom and I just looked at the most expensive monsters first, because I wanted to see, is there one that really strikes me as being crazy overpriced, that just doesn't merit it, doesn't justify the value. Certainly some of these are really expensive. I gave serious contemplation to choosing Deep Swimmer as my overrated card here. I don't own this card. I did own a couple copies. I sold them early on. I've never taken it seriously, and even to this day I still don't. Yes, sometimes it's a helpful summoner to have, and sometimes it wins because of the archery reflect. I find that, or the blind, I find that really, really rare. And the strange thing about the blind, which I love blind, but the strange thing about blind is there's so many other alternatives to add blind to your team. So you could for instance play Kelly Frendel for 4 mana, and then save 3 mana, and then drop a 3 mana blind monster, such as the one, it's like a triage blind. Of course, I'm not going to find it right now because I'm scooting around. It's a legendary, isn't it? It's a neutral, that's why. It's that neutral. Legendary. The Spirit Hoarder. So, I'd rather have a variety of monsters and perhaps less powerful summoners than one major summoner that costs an arm and a leg. And that's why I strongly considered saying Deep Swimmer was my overrated, overpriced card from the Water Splinter. But I do think he has merit, and I do think he's powerful, and I do think this price tag, when you compare it to, for instance, Kitty or Jotun, is relatively inexpensive, and therefore I'm going to ease off on Deep Swimmer and I'm going to keep looking. To compete was another consideration. I mean, he's relative, like, unless you're playing in Diamond where the stun comes out, I think this card is it's clearly a pass. Like, just pass and use your money elsewhere. You're gonna move the needle way more for $600 that it would take to get this thing max copy. Don't do it. But stun is interesting because it's always important to have stun. Stun is one of the most important abilities in the game, and it helps you control the flow of the game and helps you win matches. Redemption is fine. It's not a big deal as far as I'm concerned, unless you have a bunch of weaken out there on the field. But again, 1 mana, so that becomes interesting because archery, and it can be, this card like this could be put in the very back position, and if it dies, it dies, and if it doesn't, if it's a meat shield, great, that would be okay for a 1 mana monster. But if it isn't, if you end up putting it in a meat shield position like that and it ends up getting a stun off, then I could see some argument for this. So 2-Gun escaped my wrath for this round. I think 2-Gun is at least good enough that it's not the worst here. What else did I look at in my finger pointing? I kept looking at the different fiends and asking whether or not they're worth it. You could make a strong argument that, you know, unless you're playing a diamond, these are super overrated. But that goes for every fiend, and I didn't just want to say come in here and say fiends, right? But it is important to maybe say out loud that fiends are probably in many ways overrated and perhaps overpriced, because really, even if there's 200,000 people in the game, 300,000 people daily active in the game or whatever it is, we only need one of this for the most part. People like me want 11 copies. But even that is just 11 copies. It's not a big deal. It's not like I need hundreds and hundreds. And there's a lot of each of these out there. So the fiends are overrated to some extent. They're really good at the highest levels, but most people don't want them there. And therefore, the demand on them isn't what it maybe it could be. And therefore, the price, I think, should come down. And I think as a result, I find them to be overpriced. Torhilo's pretty decent. I mean, that price is maybe a bit high. I like it. Moving on. Eld has few hit points, but it's quite good at lower levels. It's so fast. Harpoonist is a bit of a joke in my opinion, but only because low hit points and, you know, force field has become a problem, and therefore its high damage output can be nerfed. Narisa in the same way. High mana too. So I've got lots of criticism of the water team. Maybe more than I have over the fire team. But I ultimately ended up choosing as my one overpriced card the Wave Runner. Here he is, the Wave Runner. And it's relatively cheap. So you might say, well, maybe it's, you know, that's not very much money. Maybe, like, why would I say that's overpriced? I mean, it's relatively inexpensive compared to some of these $50, $20, $100 monsters or summoners. But I mean, look at this, $65 for the max copy. And here's the deal. There's several considerations. The first thing is, like, look at 4 hit points at the lowest level, 7 at the highest level. 7 is quite low for what I consider a secondary tank. You know, as comparison, the Flying Squid has 10 at the highest level. That's a lot more hit points. That's really significant. And they're both going to fire from the reach position, so they're relatively safe, which is nice. The Wave Runner, I would think, if it was a 4 mana cost monster, I would probably really like it because of this Little League opportunities and the fact that it would fit into a lot more low mana matches. But for 5, I just feel it doesn't have a place on my team. I'm gonna spend the extra money for Squid. I'm gonna spend the extra, I meant mana, to get the Flying Squid on my team. So, like, direct comparison, in my opinion, Wave Runner is worse in every single context. I think it's slower, right? Speed goes up to 5. Speed goes up to 5. But this one has the blind. So when speed is important, you're talking about evasiveness. The Squid brings blind to the table. Wave Runner doesn't have blind. It does have snare, which I guess is interesting if you're expecting a Varicelatia. But as you all know, Varicelatia is slept on, ignored, one of the most inexpensive dice summoners and maybe summoners in the game, period. So snare is not a big deal. And then knockout in particular is almost laughable, especially for the water team. So what do I mean? So first thing, hit points. Second thing, the Flying Squid is better. Third thing, snare is pretty useless. Fourth, knockout is laughable. And why is knockout laughable? Well, you need to have stun in order to make the knockout do anything. Knockout doubles the damage when the target has been first stunned. Well, who's going to do the stunning? And if you go over to, did I open it here? I had it open. Where did I put it? Ah, yes. Okay, so from the water team, you've got the sniping narwhal, which is a sniper. So that's not going to target the same target as the Wave Runner. And then you've got, I guess you might conceivably be playing this, but this is like, first of all, this is super rare, so you're probably not playing this. Second of all, this is level 4, so unless you're playing a diamond or champion, you couldn't possibly be playing this stun. And lastly, yeah, I mean, this thing shoots secondary, right? So even if you're playing in Diamond or Champ, and even if you have a Chain Golem and you're running it with your Wave Runner for some strange reason, this is going to punch second, meaning the stun applies second after your Wave Runner is already punched, therefore the knockout doesn't take effect. So neither of those work. What about the dice? I guess you could bring 2-Gun Pete, but again, 2 speed. So no, that's not going to help you. And again, that's a Diamond or Champion. Gladiator doesn't matter. Chaos Legion. You could bring Igor, and even Igor is 3 speed. So all 3 options are not going to stun your target before the Wave Runner hits, and therefore your knockout is not going to take effect. It's not going to be doubled. It's not going to, unless it's a reverse rule set, and that's so niche it's not even worth talking about. And so that's 4 reasons why the Wave Runner is a hard pass for me. And yeah, it's not going to break the bank. I mean, $65 for a max level card is actually pretty reasonable. You know, it's not that big a deal. But for $65, you could come. If $65 is probably a lot of money for a lot of people, maybe not everybody, but for a lot of people it is. And that is equivalent to how much per 16 cents per BCX. So roughly speaking, you could come in and get a max bandit and a max swim hunter, and then a max squid probably, or not quite. Maybe it's more like, hang on, 5 plus 8. Yeah, you probably could 16. Yeah, you could. So you can get a max level squid and the swim hunter and the Pelacor bandit, and you'll have more collection power as a result of it. You'll have 3 different cards instead of 1, and you'll have a better secondary tank in the flying squid. So that's water. Moving on. Earth. On the Earth team, I think EPona is different than that Aganju or whatever it was from the Fire team. This card is actually very good. Great abilities, so I'm not going to call that overrated or overpriced. I mean, Spirit Druid was in my initial conversation. It's just too low hit points is the problem. So it ends up sometimes killing itself on Magic Reflect. And then you end up losing the Resurrect, and for 5 mana, you don't want to lose a card for 5 mana with a quick opportunity attack or something. But, you know, if you play it in reverse rule set, if you play it in equalizer matches, it can be pretty helpful. So it didn't make my top. Again, the Fiend is the, same problem I outlined before. Acid Shooter is an honorable mention for most overrated, most overpriced. 88 cents is not that bad, but I just hate this card. Scattershot needs to be a big magic shot or it's not good at all. I don't like the idea that one archery is going to maybe land on some armor somewhere. I don't even know where. Of course, it gets better with cripple and poison, but you don't even know where it's landing. So no, this was my Acid Shooter was my honorable mention worst card on the Earth Splinter. Some of the other cards I don't like. I don't like Goblin Tower. I don't like Goblin Dartling. Yeah, but those were nothing in comparison to the what I almost want to call like the budget Axemaster, the Beatrix Iron Hand. So this is like dollar store Axemaster. It's like close range, thorns, cripple, decent amount of archery damage, relatively low hit points. This thing is Axemaster but worse in all major contexts. The Axemaster, first of all, is going to do 3 archery damage at the highest levels, but 2 strikes. Even at the lowest level, it's doing double strike with 2, which is 4. And this thing's getting 1 strike at 2. So right out the gate, at the lowest level, this thing sucks compared to the Axemaster. And then At the highest level, and everywhere in between, by the way, it's like cripple with double strike is bananas. This thing has more hit points. It has 4 damage output on the Beatrix versus I guess 6, plus the 2 cripples is maybe you call that 8. And sure, it's got thorns, but it's only got 5 or 6 hit points. That's not enough for it to stay alive and for it to be a meaningful thorn source. Do you know what I mean? You need to have 10, 12 hit points before the melee that are hitting you are going to be meaningfully impacted by the thorns reflecting upon them. If they have if an attacker has 6 hit points, 1 thorn damage isn't going to be adequate. I mean, one round of thorns, and you're going to drop 2 thorns on them, maybe 3 if you've got amplify. You're going to hurt them, not kill them, and then it doesn't matter, you're dead. And so, you know, this thing is worse than the Axemaster in every way. Almost, it's a bit cheaper, $6 versus $9, but the Axemaster is worth the extra. And we're not talking about the Axemaster today, but the point is when you're looking at a certain kit and you feel that it matches another, it's important to analyze how it compares and where the price differential is, because that's going to help you understand whether or not a card is worth its price. This is super overrated and overpriced. The only context I could really see this working is if you happen to have, you know, one of the green summoners that are going to add to your archery. And then you're getting into, I think, beta, right? Yeah, Prince Rin. And I'm talking, for the purpose of this video, I'm specifically talking about modern monsters. And like I said earlier, it's so important that you, if you're telling me a card is good, don't come say it's good because I can put it with this amazing summoner and then it works well. You're just kind of saying the card kind of sucks, but I have this awesome summoner and it works really well with this kind of crummy card. That's why Beatrix is the most overpriced, overrated card on the Earth Splinter team. Moving on. On the Lifeteam, this one was tough because I feel pretty strongly about most of this deck. You know, I've got criticisms. Hero of Beyond is, you know, probably a bit too slow. I don't really like that he has close range, because the fact that he has close range, well, I do like it, but it almost implies you can put him in the first position, and you can't, because then he's not going to enjoy his last stand. And so then you're going to put him in the last spot, but he costs 7 mana and he's not cheap. So there's lots of little things I would say about different cards. Lensmaster is quite expensive, but remember archery, so it's going to work with Sloan, and so that becomes interesting. What else did I talk about before the video started? You know, some of these guys are really slow, but that can be good in its own way. And this one's got Rust and Inspire, which is an amazing combination when you're doing a melee-focused play. Prismologist, again, is quite slow, but the Blast and the Force Field and the Silence is a nice little kit. Temporal Master is a question mark for me. The stun is pretty irrelevant because it's only every other turn when they do the recharge. So, frankly, that feels like a wasted ability. Do you know what I mean? Because it's not going to help you every round, and neither is his attack. And so that makes his kit to me undesirable. But he's only 3 mana and he's relatively inexpensive for an epic especially. And for 3 mana he's going to be dropping 6 magic damage every other turn. I like that. I don't play him a lot, but I guess I'm on the fence about his utility, but he's definitely not the worst. There's lots of other cards here, man, and some of them maybe attract me for certain reasons. But at the end, Sunkai Harvester is one I batted around, but it's 4 mana, so it can play in the little leagues. I like that it has a reach, which makes it, even though it has low hit points, it makes it a little bit more resilient behind perhaps a Conjurer or, you know, the Chaos Knight. And so at the end of the day, I settled on, I did too. I settled on the Kralis, which might be a surprise. Let's talk about it. This is a good card. Of course it's a good card. It's an excellent card. But again, is it an excellent card within the context of its price point? It's selling for $122. And that's a lot of money. You could transform the ability and the power of your collection of cards in Splinterlands for that price. For 120 bucks, you could transform what you're doing here in this deck, unlocking more ability for wins, more rewards for your time and attention. So that's why Kralis just has to be, we need to talk about it. For that price point, it is literally the most expensive legendary monster on the white team. I don't know if it's the most expensive card per se, because look, Shield Bearer, you'd need 115 of those. It's $8. It still is. This is about 1,200 bucks, 1,300 bucks to get a max, and this is about 1,000. Yeah, this is just so expensive. It's not bad though. I'm not saying it's bad. It's got a great kit. Immunity, flying, heal, and strengthen is very awesome. It has a huge amount of hit points. So many times those earthquake noxious fumes matches, this guy saves my butt. But I have a level 3 and I have 6 BCX of it in it, and I just listed it for 727, and I'm the cheapest one on the market. And it's like, what could I do with $700 in this game? I could do a lot. And so even though it's an awesome card, even though I like it, there's so much going for it. I feel like it's a sell. It's an overrated, overpriced monster. I hope that makes sense. It's not a bad card. That's not the point. It's just overpriced and overrated when you compare what some of these other amazing cards, especially some of these newer cards that are really inexpensive. Life Leech. Even, this is not so new anymore, but I love this card, Temple Priest, Jin Renova, maybe Temporal Master, Dax Paragon even. A lot of cards here that are relatively inexpensive that you could load up on if you had $700 or $120 worth of value unlocked by selling one Kralis. Okay, moving on. Death. From the Death Splinter, I considered Undead Rex at first because I don't love this kit because at first it's too slow, and at the higher levels it's fast, but the problem is it doesn't have piercing, and so usually you end up hitting an armor, and therefore the trample doesn't end up taking effect. And 9 mana is a lot of mana for a monster with no shield and no armor and no dodge or phase or whatever to be resilient. So I don't like how vulnerable this is. Even though it has a huge amount of hit points, it's still vulnerable. So Undead Rex is kind of in the conversation, but it's not going to be the worst. Giant Scorpion I don't like either. Too few hit points, no sort of shield or void or whatever, and therefore quite vulnerable, but it is low mana match monster. Marrow's Ghost is perhaps, it's maybe it's not worth a lot of money, but it's also not being sold for a lot of money. So, it's like, whatever. It's maybe not the best card, but that's fine. It doesn't have the highest price. There's lots of cards here that maybe you might mention. Perhaps Cthulhu is too expensive. It probably is, but it is a good card. Fallen Spectre, probably that's too expensive, but in the right context, it's very powerful. At the end of the day, I ended up deciding that I felt that the most overrated was actually the Bone Golem. Most overpriced, overrated card. And it's not a bad card. That's not the point. We said it once, we'll say it again. It's not a bad card. It's a good card, in fact. If you're playing at the high levels, I really like this card. But for this price point, and considering some of the options that are out there, like you get 4 melee, you got 1 speed, a little bit of armor, you got the repair and the void. That's great. That's going to be quite resilient, actually, unless you get stunned. And the knockout, but knockout's whatever. Knockout means you need another monster to help you achieve what you're seeking. Again, like we said earlier, if you need to add a summoner to a monster to make it worthwhile, just like if you needed to add a different monster to make the first monster, worthwhile. I don't know. So I don't love knockout, but it's a good monster, and it's probably, it might be worth the $2.50. Might be worth it. And look, you could get a good deal here if you bought these ones. That'd be about 220 bucks to get a max copy. But here's the problem. The Windiku is selling for, there's a max copy right there for 96 bucks. So it's less than half the price of the Bone Golem. And this thing has, you know, more hit points. Maybe the same number of hit points because the other one had armor. But you have thorns, you have heal here. You have slow, which is so nice to be able to control your opponent. This one is going at 3 speed instead of 1 on the Bone Golem. And then you're slowing your opponent too. And then there's Amplify, remember, nowadays is quite easy to get some Amplify out there, so the thorns become even more deadly. I just feel like this is clearly, if you need a tank on your black team, this is clearly the choice. I mean, it's less mana. It has a better kit, in my opinion. Sure, it doesn't have the armor, and I like armor on my monsters, but I think this is I'd be willing to sacrifice for, you know, saving $120 on this card to get this max copied versus to get the Bone Golem max copy. I think that makes a lot of sense. And so that's why it's not, Bone Golem's not a bad card, but it is overpriced and it is overrated in the context of the things that are available currently that probably offer equal or maybe even more value. Okay, so Cursed Windiku is the better option. That's why Bone Golem gets shafted. Moving on to Dragon. This was tough for me. I don't think any of these cards are bad exactly. I thought about Gloridax Soldier, but Shield is really nice. You know, it is very nice to have Shield and then flying with it. Oppress is cool sometimes, but this guy's ability is not so much that he kills things. He's not such a, you know, even at the highest levels, he's only doing 3 damage. His ability is more that he's resilient because of the shield, which is a very important thing for a tank to offer. And for 5 mana too. So I give him, he might be the worst, but he isn't the one I'm picking. Zyvax perhaps needs some conversation, some thought on the topic, because Recharge just really hasn't found its niche in the meta. But I'm not going to call him the worst, not for that price. I looked at Daria Dragon Skill for a bit, and then I remember, and it is probably, of all the Dragon Summoners, I think that's the one you should avoid. Not because it's bad, because that price point though, $25 per BCX, and you need 46 of them, which is crazy when you think Camilla is 11. You need 11 of them because it's legendary, and it's 500 roughly, so 500 or 1,000, and these are the same monster, right? Like +1 melee, -1 melee. This is going to be, in most contexts, I think, in most contexts, just as effective, powerful as something like this, and for half the price. But then I realized Daria is actually one of the old reward cards, so I disregarded. That was my pick, and I was like, oh crud, that one doesn't qualify because today we're talking about just modern cards. And ultimately I decided with Dragon, I wanted to say Camilla Sungazer. That got me thinking about summoners, and I was like, Camilla Sungazer is actually overrated and overpriced. And yes, this is, as an untamed card, is part of the modern league, because just as Daria is more expensive than Camilla, well, Camilla is a lot more expensive than Quix. You need 11 copies of either to get a max copy, and as you can see, $50 per unit with the Camilla versus 29 with the Quix. That's a huge difference. And arguably speed is a way better nerf to throw at your enemy than melee, when you don't even know if they're going to do a melee, but you do always know that speed differential is a good thing, unless reverse rule set, but that's like once in a while situation. So Quix to me is objectively better than Camilla, even though he's 1 more mana, and he's half the price. So I say to you, Camilla is overrated and overpriced. But I did also add that the Gloridax, right here, Gloridax Magus, is actually probably overrated and overpriced, depending on what level you're playing at. And let's talk about it. It's a good card. I like it. I own it. I use it quite a bit. But I use it at the highest levels because it offers blind, and I'll play it in context where I'm using Kitty and I'm using like a Elmo Cambio tank or maybe a Nightmare tank, which has phase. And that's so important because I want to be able to dodge that magic incoming magic. And so blind is really helpful. And this is not a bad little damage dealer from the back line that's giving me some support contributions like the blind and the shatter and the knockout and the blast. But this blast is mostly useless unless you bring like a Delwyn Dragon Scale. And again, that's like an old summoner that most people don't have. And even if you do have, I don't like this argument that if I just use the right summoner, it's going to be perfect. So I feel this is maybe one of the most overrated, overpriced cards. But at the highest levels, it has an interesting kit. The problem is most people don't play with it at the highest levels. If you're playing in bronze, I think huge pass. 1 magic damage with blast, not good enough. Even if you're playing at level 2, which is silver, you're getting a knockout, but who is your stun? Like, who is the stun that's allowing that knockout to trigger? Nobody. Again, I think we looked at stuns earlier, right? And the stuns are just not present. These are all, that's max level, gold, gold. So these are all way higher than what you would imagine. That you're simply not seeing. This is a silver. So you could maybe bring, I guess you could do a black dragon team and do Cthulhu and then Gloridax. I find it hugely unlikely that that's what you're running, but that's the sort of thing you would need to contrive in order to take advantage of the knockout. And even then, this 1 magic would hit for 2. It's just grossly unimportant. Like, it's totally, this card is super overrated until you get it into higher levels, specifically max level, and maybe it's good at level 3, but I would say really max level or not at all. And so this is my honorable mention, second worst. But yeah, I would say Camilla Sungazer is the winner of the crown of ill repute, let's say. Okay, let's finish this off and I'm gonna go to bed. I am exhausted. So we're on to neutral, and this is where we'll finish it. Again, these are just the moderns, and this is the most overrated, overpriced cards that are out there. You know, Chain Golem, expensive maybe, but it's pretty good. So probably that's too expensive, but this is a good card. So this is with a great kit, by the way. Like, not just a good card, but it's an excellent kit. Shield and Void, the two, in my opinion, the two most important tank abilities. With stun, so good. Piercing, such a good tank. This is a classic tank, and it's got cool art. So yes, it's expensive. I don't recommend you buy it, but it's really, really good. So I'm not going to call it the worst. What did I end up saying on this one? I forget. Oh yeah. We'll get to it. I mean, Grenadier I don't love. Quite expensive, really low hit points, but it does the blast damage, and it's got the oppress, so it can really drop bombs in certain contexts for 3 mana. So it's not bad. Chicken for this price, maybe it's overrated in the sense that you don't need 400 or 100 copies of it. You need it's a rare, and you technically you need 100 copies to get the high, 115 to get max. No one's doing that. You don't need to do that. So it's overrated in the sense that really all you need is 1. And so maybe some of these big ones are never gonna sell. And so you know what I mean? Like that, in that way, perhaps it's overrated. But everyone likes the chicken, and everyone needs 1 chicken on their team. So that's not my pick. Ultimately, I don't like the Chariot, but at least it's another card to go with your Sloan. Same with the Gem Meteor, same thing. Ultimately, I ended up going with the Horny Toad. Where is he? There he is. Horny Toad. This card, it's not even that expensive. But it is a common, so you're going to need 400 copies if you want a max copy. And you're talking 400 times 40 cents equals 160-ish bucks. That's pretty crazy for what this thing is. This thing is really, really lame. And I have a max copy, but it's so niche. You know what I mean? It's like if it's a equalizer match, then perhaps you slip it in there and it ends up helping you out. But otherwise, because I like the poison and I like the reach, right? Like it's a good low mana cost monster. It just dies too easy. 2 hit points all the way up to high silver, right? Yeah, silver. You get that 3rd hit point. 3 hit points is not good enough. And you're only doing 2 damage there, which is not good enough. And poison isn't until gold. And then when you get that poison, you actually go back in hit points down to 2. So it's so weak and vulnerable and actually slow, by the way. Like, I mean, if at least if it had 5 or 6 speed, I could get behind it that. But it doesn't, and it has no evasiveness, and it has no self-perseverance, and no shield, no armor, nothing. Even at the highest levels, it's got 4 hit points, which is really low, and yes, 4 speed, and yes, 3 damage. But that's really what you need. You need it at the highest level to make this thing worth your time. And I think there's just so many other cards you could put out in the 2nd position on pretty much every single splinter. Like, there's just so many good cards, and it's very, very rare that I ever look for the Horny Toad. Even I think I'm currently delegating it to a friend, but it's terrible. And so it's even though it's only $160 or whatever, that's $160 poorly spent. Do not buy the Horny Toad. Use that value other ways to get some of these really inexpensive cards that are going to maybe move the needle better for you and help you grind farther, faster, and just get those maximized rewards, right? So that's it. Let me know in the comments below whether you agree, disagree. Did I miss something? Did I insult your favorite card? If so, which one was it? Thanks, guys, for your time and attention. Have an amazing day. God bless.